One of my own?
Mr. Hoffman wants to spend his weekend here and be, are you ready? Irresistible to women.
Irresistible to women?
Fantasy Island ruled TV for 7 years until it all fell apart in 1984. The official story blamed creative stagnation, but the truth was darker. 4 decades later, we finally know why TV's beloved escape really ended. The star who carried a gun on set, the devastating paycheck battle, and the dark turn that made Ricardo Montalban want out. This is the untold story of how paradise became a nightmare. In 1977, Gene Levitt had a simple but fascinating idea. What if there was a place where people could live out their deepest fantasies? That idea became Fantasy Island, a TV movie that aired in 1977. It was so successful that a second movie, Return to Fantasy Island, followed in 1978. The concept was strong enough to become a full series. ABC saw its potential, and the show was officially greenlit. Unlike traditional TV dramas, Fantasy Island followed an anthology format. Every week, new guests arrived on the island with their own stories, allowing the show to explore different genres. Some episodes were romantic, others were thrilling, and some leaned into supernatural horror. This variety kept the show fresh and unpredictable. Aaron Spelling was no stranger to hit TV shows, and he knew Fantasy Island had potential. At one point, in a meeting with ABC executives, he jokingly pitched the idea of some guy on an island granting wishes. That offhand comment turned into reality when the network backed the concept. Spelling had already mastered anthology storytelling with The Love Boat, so he understood how to structure a show where every episode introduced new characters while keeping familiar elements in place. It was a risk, but one that paid off. Casting the right actor for Mr. Roarke was a crucial decision. At first, the producers considered Orson Welles. He had the presence, the deep voice, and an air of mystery that fit the role. But in the end, Aaron Spelling went with Ricardo Montalban. It turned out to be the perfect choice. He gave the character a quiet power, a sense that he knew more than he let on. His most famous line, "Smiles, everyone, smiles," was more than just a greeting. It was a signal. The island was about to change lives. But behind that warm welcome, there was always something deeper. Roarke never stopped reminding guests that fantasies had consequences. No matter how much someone wanted something, the island had its own way of teaching lessons. Montalban played these moments with a mix of kindness and quiet warning. He knew that sometimes getting exactly what you wanted could be the worst thing in the world. A big part of Roarke's mystery came from Montalban himself. He later admitted that he imagined Roarke as a fallen angel. This wasn't in the script. It was something he came up with on his own. A way to explain why Roarke seemed almost supernatural. He had power, but he also had limits. He could guide people, but he couldn't change their fates. This idea made Roarke's warnings even more meaningful. If Montalban was the heart of Fantasy Island, then Hervé Villeheyes was its spark. Villeheyes played Tattoo, Roarke's energetic assistant, and he was never meant to be part of the original plan. Producers initially considered a sexy female assistant for Roarke, but Villeheyes was cast at the last minute, and his presence changed the dynamic of the show. Villeheyes played Tattoo with energy and charm, making the character much more than a sidekick. He was funny, but he was also smart. He asked questions that gave Roarke a chance to explain the rules of the island. More importantly, Tattoo was the only one who truly understood Roarke, making their bond one of the show's strongest elements. Villeheyes' performance helped break stereotypes. In most shows, actors with dwarfism were given roles that treated their size as a joke. Tattoo was different. He had a real presence on the island. His catchphrase, "Da plane, became his trademark. The show's other magic came from its guests. Every week, new stars arrived on the island, hoping for a fantasy that would change their lives. The producers made a brilliant decision when casting these roles. Instead of hiring unknown actors, they brought in famous faces from Hollywood's past. Peter Lawford, Carol Lynley, and other stars who had once been household names found a second life on Fantasy Island. Their presence gave the show an extra layer of nostalgia, drawing in viewers who remembered them from years before. At the same time, the show also introduced future stars. Michelle Pfeiffer, Gina Davis, and LeVar Burton all made early appearances. For them, Fantasy Island was a stepping stone, a chance to be seen by millions. Pfeiffer even got her Screen Actors Guild card after her role in a 1981 episode. These moments helped launch their careers, proving that Fantasy Island wasn't just about the past. It was also about the future. Of course, no guest could arrive on the island without the plane. That small amphibious aircraft became one of the most recognizable images of the show. It wasn't just a set piece. It was a real Grumman Widgeon, a sleek seaplane that took off and landed on water. Every week, it carried new guests to the island, marking the beginning of their adventure. When Fantasy Island premiered in 1977, it didn't take long for audiences to latch on. For a few years, it was one of the biggest shows on television. In 1978, it reached its peak, pulling in over 21 million viewers a week. It was part of a Saturday night lineup that also included The Love Boat, creating a perfect escape for audiences. People loved watching guests arrive, excited and hopeful, only to realize their dreams weren't as simple as they thought. Some fantasies turned into lessons, others became nightmares. Either way, Roarke was always there, watching, guiding, and making sure no one left the island unchanged. Over time, the show softened. The darker, more mysterious elements faded. The later seasons focused more on sentimental stories, ones with happy endings instead of haunting lessons. Some fans missed the original edge. Others stayed for the charm of Roarke and the comfort of familiar faces. But when Vilhais left, something felt different. The balance was gone. The show struggled, and in 1984, it ended. But the reasons ran deeper than just a shift in tone. At the peak of Fantasy Island's success, Hervé Vilhais was one of its biggest stars. Fans loved him, but behind the scenes, things were far from perfect. Vilhais was making $25,000 per episode, which was a solid paycheck, but it didn't sit right with him. His co-star, Ricardo Montalban, was earning $40,000 per episode. Vilhais believed he deserved the same. He fought for equal pay, but the producers refused. To them, Montalban was the lead, and Vilhais was the sidekick. The argument dragged on, and in 1983, they fired him. That decision changed everything. Without Tattoo, the show lost something special. The producers brought in a new character named Lawrence, played by Christopher Hewitt, but it wasn't the same. The chemistry that had made the show work was gone. Losing his job was a devastating blow. Vilhais had already been dealing with serious health problems due to his dwarfism. His internal organs were too large for his small frame, which caused him constant pain. After leaving the show, his financial situation collapsed. By 1986, the money he had earned was gone. He struggled to find steady work, and his life took a downward spiral. Even before his firing, Vilhais's behavior on set had been a problem. He had a reputation for being difficult, and his mood swings made him unpredictable. He drove go-karts recklessly on set, creating safety concerns. He made inappropriate advances toward women, which strained his relationships with the cast and crew. Ricardo Montalban, who had once been friendly with him, noticed a change. Vilhais became more arrogant and distant. He often refused to greet people, and at times, he even carried a gun on set. The producers tolerated his antics for a while, but in the end, they decided he wasn't worth the trouble. While the cast was dealing with drama, the show's writers faced their own struggles. Fantasy Island ran for 7 seasons, and each episode required a new fantasy-driven story. Every guest who arrived on the island had a dream they wanted to experience, but every story also needed a lesson. In the beginning, the ideas were fresh, but as the seasons went on, the writers ran out of ways to keep things interesting. Ricardo Montalban later called the later scripts banal morality plays, and many fans agreed. Ricardo Montalban remained committed to his role, but he grew frustrated. He had always taken acting seriously and wanted Fantasy Island to tell deeper, more meaningful stories. Instead, the show became more predictable. It followed the same formula season after season, and Montalban knew it was losing its magic. Moreover, Fantasy Island started as something fresh, a place where people's deepest desires came to life. But dreams don't always turn out the way you expect. That was the heart of the show. Every week, guests arrived on the island believing they would finally get what they wanted. Instead, they learned a lesson, sometimes the hard way. At first, this idea was exciting. Viewers never knew how a fantasy would twist into something unexpected. But over time, the pattern became obvious. The "be careful what you wish for" trope played out again and again. A lonely woman wanted to be a mermaid. She got her wish, but found the ocean wasn't as magical as she imagined. A man longed to speak to the dead. He did, but the ghosts he met weren't friendly. Audiences caught on. The element of surprise faded because everyone knew what was coming. No matter what a guest wished for, there would always be a downside. The showrunners tried to keep things fresh by adding new characters and different types of fantasies. But the core formula never really changed. Even though the twists felt predictable, fans kept watching. The mix of fantasy and moral lessons still made for good entertainment. One of the biggest reasons the show worked was Mr. Roarke. Ricardo Montalban played him as a man who seemed to know everything. He was always calm, always in control, and always a step ahead. But who was he? That was the real mystery. Roarke was no ordinary man. He hinted at a past stretching across centuries. He claimed to know people like Cleopatra and Helen of Troy. He fought supernatural forces, including the devil himself. Some believed he was immortal. One episode showed him reuniting with a lost love, only for her to reveal she had died 300 years ago. Even Montalban had his own theory. He once said he imagined Roarke as a fallen angel. If true, it would mean Fantasy Island was not just a tropical paradise, but something far deeper. Maybe even a form of purgatory. But the show never confirmed anything. One episode treated him like a man with special knowledge. Another suggested he had godlike powers. The lack of clear answers made him fascinating, but it also left some fans frustrated. As the series went on, the producers tried to reach a younger audience. That led to one of the show's biggest missteps, the Fantasy Island Sunday Special. These episodes replaced the usual mysterious plane arrival with something more playful. Instead of stepping off a jet, guests floated down in a hot air balloon. The stories were simpler, designed to be fun for kids. It didn't work. The show's adult audience had come to expect deep, sometimes eerie, morality tales. The lighter tone felt out of place. Episodes like Amusement Park and Rock Stars didn't have the same impact as the original format. After just a few attempts, the producers scrapped the idea and went back to the usual formula. But by then, the show was struggling. In 1983, it aired Remember. When? A clip show that recycled scenes from old episodes. The setup was simple. Tattoo suffered a head injury, so Mr. Roarke and others reminded him of past fantasies. It was a cost-cutting move, something TV shows often did to stretch their budgets. But it sent a clear message. The show was running out of steam. ABC's decision to cut budgets for Fantasy Island changed the show in a big way. At first, the series drew audiences with a lineup of A-list guest stars. That was a big part of its appeal. But as the network tried to save money, it started replacing big-name celebrities with soap opera actors and lesser-known talents. This shift wasn't just about Fantasy Island. The late 1970s and early 1980s were a time of rising production costs, and networks were looking for ways to keep their shows profitable without losing too much in quality. As the seasons went on, the show leaned even more into casting soap opera actors. Kiara Barnes, known for her role in The Bold and the Beautiful, even appeared in the 2021 reboot, proving that the trend never really went away. But this wasn't just about Fantasy Island. Many other shows at the time used similar casting strategies to control costs while still keeping their audiences engaged. ABC made another risky decision when it moved Fantasy Island from its Saturday night slot to Fridays. The show had thrived on Saturdays, often airing right after The Love Boat, another hit series from producer Aaron Spelling. That pairing was a major advantage. Viewers who tuned in for The Love Boat would naturally stick around for Fantasy Island, creating a strong and consistent audience. Moving the show to Fridays broke that rhythm. Friday nights were more competitive, and Fantasy Island lost its built-in lead-in audience. Ratings took a hit. At its peak on Saturdays, the show ranked among the top 30 programs, even reaching 17th place during the 1977 to 78 and 1980 to 81 seasons. But by the time it moved to Fridays, those numbers dropped. In its final season, the show had fallen to 49th place. This kind of time slot shuffle was common in network television. ABC was trying to strengthen its Friday lineup, but the move backfired. Longtime viewers didn't follow, and new audiences didn't replace them. The shift disrupted the show's momentum and contributed to its eventual cancellation. Another factor that weakened Fantasy Island was Aaron Spelling himself. By the early 1980s, Spelling had become one of the most powerful producers in television. He was the creative force behind massive hits like Charlie's Angels, The Love Boat, and Fantasy Island. But as new projects emerged, his focus started to shift. In 1981, Dynasty premiered, quickly becoming one of television's most talked-about shows. With its mix of wealth, betrayal, and high-stakes drama, Dynasty was a perfect fit for the primetime soap opera trend that was taking over TV. Just 2 years later, Spelling launched another major project, Hotel, which targeted a similar audience. These new series needed attention and resources, and Spelling prioritized them. The aging demographic was a bigger issue. When Fantasy Island first premiered, it attracted a wide range of viewers. But over time, its audience skewed older. That was a problem for ABC. Advertisers typically target younger viewers with more disposable income, and as the show's fan base aged, it became less appealing to sponsors. Once a show stops bringing in advertising dollars, it becomes an easy target for cancellation. In the early 1980s, television was changing fast. NBC introduced action-packed shows that pulled in younger audiences and left older adventure series struggling to keep up. The A-Team exploded onto the screen in 1983 and became an instant hit. It had everything: fast action, humor, and a team of misfits who always managed to escape danger in the most outrageous ways. By its second season, nearly a quarter of American households were watching. Then came Knight Rider in 1982. A lone crime fighter and his high-tech talking car took on criminals in style. The futuristic concept felt fresh and exciting, and audiences loved it. Both shows had a sense of adventure, but they moved at a faster pace than anything before. Younger viewers who once enjoyed the mystery and fantasy of Fantasy Island now had something new to get hooked on. At the same time, ABC was heading in a different direction. Instead of adventure and fantasy, the network focused on family-friendly sitcoms. Who's the Boss? Premiered in 1984 and quickly became one of ABC's biggest hits. It had humor, warmth, and characters that felt real. This was exactly what the network wanted: shows that reflected everyday life and could bring families together in front of the TV. The change wasn't just about ratings. It reflected a shift in American culture. Family values were taking center stage, and television followed. Shows like Family Ties and The Cosby Show reinforced this trend, pulling in massive audiences. Compared to these light-hearted sitcoms, the dramatic and sometimes eerie stories of Fantasy Island started to feel out of place. With younger viewers drawn to NBC's action shows and ABC moving toward wholesome comedies, Fantasy Island was left behind. It had once been a top-rated series, but now it felt like it belonged to another era. By 1984, ABC decided it was time to pull the plug. When the network announced Fantasy Island's cancellation, it gave two main reasons: creative stagnation and an aging demographic. After 7 seasons, the network felt the show had run out of fresh ideas. Storylines were starting to feel repetitive, and audiences weren't as engaged. By 1984, Ricardo Montalban was ready to leave Fantasy Island behind. For 7 seasons, he had played Mr. Roarke, the mysterious host who made guests' dreams come true. The role made him a television icon, but the excitement had faded. The show had been a massive hit when it premiered in 1977, but after years of the same formula, the magic started to wear off. Ratings were slipping, and Montalban himself felt trapped. He had already built a strong career with roles like Khan in Star Trek, and he was eager for something new. For Wendy Schaal, who joined the cast in later seasons, Fantasy Island was not the show she had hoped for. She played Julie, Mr. Rourke's goddaughter, but she always felt like an outsider. In her eyes, Fantasy Island lost something important when Vilhais left. The magic died with Tattoo, she later said. Vilhais had been part of the heart of the show. His exit wasn't just about creative changes. He had requested fewer work hours due to health problems, but that led to disagreements with producers. In the end, he was let go. To fill the gap, Schaal's character was introduced, but it was never the same. Tattoo had been irreplaceable. Schaal did her best, but even she could feel the difference. The chemistry between Montalban and Vilhais had been a key part of Fantasy Island's appeal. Once it was gone, the show struggled. Looking back, Schaal understood that some things just can't be replicated. While the main cast faced their own challenges, guest stars had their own experiences. The show was famous for bringing in new actors every week, giving them a chance to play out wild and dramatic fantasies. But not everyone found it exciting. Melissa Sue Anderson, best known as Mary Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie, once summed up her time on Fantasy Island in just a few words: a paycheck, not art. For many actors, that was exactly what it was. The show was fun, but it wasn't the kind of job that pushed them creatively. Episodes followed a predictable pattern, and filming was fast-paced. It wasn't the place for deep, complex performances, but it was still a primetime hit, and appearing on Fantasy Island meant good exposure and steady work. ABC tried to bring Fantasy Island back to life in 1998 with a new version starring Malcolm McDowell as Mr. Roarke. This time, the island had a darker, more supernatural feel. Instead of the original's mix of adventure and lighthearted fantasy, the reboot leaned into eerie mysteries and unexplained phenomena. It was even filmed in Hawaii, giving it a more exotic look compared to the California-based original. One of the biggest changes was the supporting cast. Instead of Rourke's iconic sidekick, Tattoo, the new version featured a group of assistants helping to run the island. The idea was to expand the world and add fresh dynamics, but it came at a cost. The chemistry between Mr. Roarke and Tattoo had been a huge part of what made the original show work. Without that familiar duo, something felt off. Audiences never really connected with this new take. The supernatural elements were meant to modernize the show, but they clashed with what longtime fans loved about Fantasy Island. The original had mystery, but it was wrapped in charm and optimism. The reboot's darker tone made it feel like a completely different show. Despite efforts to breathe new life into the series, the revival only lasted 13 episodes before being canceled. The final few episodes were quietly aired on the Sci-Fi Channel, marking an unceremonious end to the experiment. In the end, this attempt proved just how hard it is to revive a classic, especially when it loses the very elements that made it special in the first place. In 2020, Blumhouse Productions tried to give Fantasy Island a fresh spin with a horror reboot. The idea had potential. Take a beloved TV show, add a darker edge, and tap into the massive horror audience. With Jason Blum involved, the studio behind hits like Get Out and Paranormal Activity, expectations were high, but the result was far from a success. Jeff Wadlow, the director, kept the original show's premise, an island where guests' deepest desires come true, but shifted the focus entirely to horror. What started as fantasy quickly turned into a nightmare for the characters. The problem was, it also became a nightmare for audiences. The movie relied on predictable horror cliches, failing to deliver either real scares or the eerie charm of the original series. The tone felt confused, trying to balance horror and comedy, but never quite nailing either. A major issue was how it ignored what made the original show work. The classic Fantasy Island had darkness, but it also had heart, mystery, and morality at its core. The stories weren't just about fantasies going wrong. They explored deeper human dilemmas. The movie, on the other hand, leaned into jump scares and over-the-top plot twists without the emotional depth to back them up. By the time the film tried to explain the island's supernatural forces, it felt more like a last-minute attempt to tie loose ends rather than a well-thought-out mystery. Despite all this, the film wasn't a total financial disaster. It made around $48.5 million on a $7 million budget. Technically profitable, but a disappointment for a studio known for turning low-budget horror into major box office hits. Blumhouse had banked on name recognition to draw in fans, but the final product failed to connect with either horror lovers or longtime Fantasy Island viewers. It was a reminder that simply making something darker doesn't guarantee success, especially when the original's charm is lost in the process. But even though the reboot failed, Fantasy Island left a lasting mark on pop culture. The show's influence can be seen in modern hits like Westworld and The Good Place. Both series use controlled environments, an advanced theme park, and a carefully curated afterlife to explore deep moral questions. Westworld takes the idea of people indulging their wildest fantasies and examines what happens when those fantasies spiral out of control. Meanwhile, The Good Place plays with morality, testing its characters through carefully designed scenarios, much like Mr. Roarke did with his guests. Of course, none of it would have been the same without Ricardo Montalban. As Mr. Roarke, he wasn't just a host. He was a mysterious guide, charming yet enigmatic, always knowing more than he let on. His presence gave the show its soul. When he passed away in 2009 at the age of 88, television lost one of its last great gentleman hosts. Even today, Montalban's legacy lives on. His work in Fantasy Island represents a time when TV was more than just weekly episodes. It was an experience that brought people together. He showed that a great actor could elevate a simple premise into something timeless. And while Hollywood continues to reboot and reimagine classic shows, some things just can't be replicated.